Okay, clearly my webcam is broken, so I will be going to IT. My apologies, although I think you can get the main picture without seeing my dirty house. So we left off with the shutdown rule, which is if price is less than average variable cost, you shut down. Another example of this is I'm an avid user of Priceline and Hotwire. These are examples of price discrimination, which is charging different prices to different people for the same product. Basically, with those, I pose as a consumer with an elastic demand, right? Like I've got tech savvy, I'm willing to take risks, whatever. And the lowest price that I will ever get on a hotel room is $35. And I talked to a student once who worked in a hotel, and I told the story, and they said, well, that's because that's the variable costs. That's the cost of electricity, that's the cost of housekeeping, that's the cost of the front desk worker or whatever. And so they're selling the hotel room at a loss, but they're covering their variable costs, so it makes sense to do that. All right, so let's see where we're at. Yeah, okay, so we're gonna talk about the short-run firm supply curve for a competitive firm. If a firm produces where price equals marginal cost or where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, imagine that there's a horizontal line here, right? The firm's going to produce this quantity. At this price, this quantity. At this price, this quantity. And then it's going to shut down whenever the price goes below average variable cost. So this is how we get the short-run supply curve for an individual firm. So supply equals marginal cost. This is so deeply ingrained. Sometimes at the beginning of a semester, I'll slip up and I'll start labeling the supply curve. Supply equals marginal cost, because that's what it is. And then, if you're to think about the market supply curve, that's just adding up individual firm supply curves. So we can say supply equals marginal cost at the industry level as well. So what I want to do is I want you to pull up Chapter 8, Worksheet 2. I put them in the wrong order, but we can deal. And basically, Chapter 8, Worksheet 2 looks like this. If you can take a minute and try this, that would be great. Okay, so what I want you to do, and I messed up. I put the firm over here and the industry over here. Your textbook puts the industry here and the firm here. I've used so many textbooks over the years, I get it mixed up in my head. But regardless, we're going to put the firm demand curve, which is a perfectly horizontal line here, next to the industry demand curve. Now the trick is, if we look back at the PowerPoint, the market determines the price at the intersection of supply and demand, and that's where we get demand. So what I ask you guys to do is to draw marginal cost, average cost, and average variable cost such that the firm is making zero profit. Now, recall that profit is equal to quantity times price minus average total cost. So basically, what's going to happen here is the average total cost is going to have to it has to be the minimum of that touching the demand curve. Now I have actually posted a bit of a key here. Okay, I apologize about the words in the back here, but you can see what I mean. Demand equal to the price determined by the market. So the way to draw this is you draw the marginal cost curve. I once had a basketball player and he said, oh, a Nike sign. So I always think of it as a Nike sign. Nike sign here, you produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. If you want to draw a firm with zero profit, this average total cost has to intersect it at that particular place. Keep in mind, marginal cost intersects average total cost at the minimum, and so that's why that has to be the case. It also has to intersect average variable cost at the minimum, which mine looks a little bit sloppy here, but that's the reason that that's the minimum. Okay, so now it's all coming together, isn't it? So I said label the economic profit, and then students always say, but I can't, there's none. And then I say, yeah, that's the point. We can see that there's none. All right, as for Okay, suppose there's an increase in incomes and that this good is a normal good. Draw the effect on the industry graph. That is a shift to the right in demand and price increases. So let me pull up my second scan here, which is a bit neater, okay? So we see an increase in demand, and because of this, the market price increases, and the individual firm demand curve increases. Now I've labeled this D2 equals marginal revenue 2. That's just the way that I've done things over the years. As long as you label it something that makes sense, I'm fine. And then I say label the profit. Now we have to think through a few steps here. Where is the firm going to produce now? Where marginal revenue equals marginal cost is going to be to the right. Okay, so we should have a Q double star here. At this Q double star, you take price minus average total cost, which is here, times the quantity, and that's your profit. Commonly, students will want to go down to this demand curve. Depending on how you draw it, it looks really close. But you have to say price minus average total cost over. Okay, so let's go back over to the sheet. As firms see the, and then you say label the economic profit, and they say, oh, I can label it now, and it's all great. All right, as firms see this economic profit, what will happen to the industry? So what's going to happen here is firms are going to see this and the supply is going to increase. So as we move from the short run to the long run, we actually see price impacting supply, which is something I told you didn't happen, right? If price goes up, supply doesn't change. Well, in the long run, it does, okay? So as firms are they see these high profits, they're drawn into the industry, and supply is going to shift to the right. So let me pull up my third scan here. Okay, we can see supply is shifted to the right, and I have been very careful to draw it so that the price is exactly the same as it was before, so that I just label the demand curve PE equals P3, D equals D3, and there we go. So what happens is we return back to the minimum average total cost curve, and we return to the point where there is zero profit. So in the long run, a perfectly competitive firm will have zero economic profit. It's a big takeaway. All right, so we've got a little bit of a description here, but this is what I wanted to show you. The long run competitive equilibrium. In the long run, firms will produce where the marginal cost is at the minimum of the average total cost curve equals the demand curve. So firms will have zero profit in the long run. Two things. Number one, what does it mean to have zero economic profit? It's still decent life, right? Like you're covering your next possible options, right? Because we put opportunity cost in economic profit. So it's like not that bad. The second thing is, if I was to be, a skeptic, I'd say, maybe I don't want to go into farming, right? Like it's not the end of the world, but zero economic profit in a perfectly competitive market, we're able to see some profit in some of these other market structures. So I used to talk about how, if I had a choice, I would not be in this market, I would not be a farmer, whatever. I had a grad student one year raise her hand, Hannah, and she said, yeah, that's true, but my family comes from a long line of farmers, and what's happening is as you're making zero profit, the value of your land might be increasing. So she said, even though my family has made probably zero economic profit on the farm, we've done super well because our land has appreciated and we can sell it for this huge profit. So I always thought that was an interesting perspective. In the long run, perfectly competitive firms produce a level of output such that price equals marginal cost, which is equal to the minimum of the average cost curve. Okay, so we actually covered a lot today. We covered the different types of market structures, the Herfindahl whatever index, the concentration ratio. We've covered why the individual firm demand curve is perfectly elastic, where they produce. We've brought in the cost curves, right, with all the details. They cross at the minimum. We've brought in supply and demand. So I think this is kind of an exciting part of the semester because we went through a lot. It's only been 45 minutes of me talking, less than that. And the reason we're able to go so fast is because if you've been following along at this point, It's all stuff you know, right? It's just all coming together. So what we're going to do next week is we're going to cover monopoly. Monopoly is a little bit more difficult because we have a downward sloping demand curve, meaning marginal revenue is going to be different, but perfectly reasonable, a perfectly reasonable next step after this. So hopefully you're kind of enjoying, we're getting into the flow at this point in the semester.